30 nautical miles off the coast of Massachusetts lay the island of Nantucket. It was a beautiful, peaceful, and serene island until in 1712 it was discovered that off her shores lived an animal containing a precious commodity: oil. This would change the social and economic dynamic of Nantucket forever. Nantucket, which was inhabited by Native Americans, was discovered by Europeans in the mid to late 1600s. From that point until 1712, the economy of Nantucket was driven by farming and trade between the Europeans and the natives. In 1712, the islanders' lives were changed forever when it was discovered that there was oil inside of whales. Nantucketers were thrown into an industry that would bring them wealth and success for the next 200 years. The Nantucket whaling industry of the 17th and 18th century propelled the women of Nantucket to encounter new leadership positions, encouraged racial diversity among captains and their crews, and led to foreign exchange that dominated the global economy. Due to the length of time whalers were at sea, sometimes up to 3 years, the women of Nantucket rose to prominent positions within the community. Along with being responsible for the well-being of their children and homes, they were business owners, merchants, artisans, and social leaders. Lucretia Mott, a civil rights activist, abolitionist, and religious reformer who was born in Nantucket in 1793, wrote about this. In a letter to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, another women's rights activist and abolitionist, Mott writes that women have long been regarded as the stronger part, this owing in some measure to so many of the men being away at sea. During the absence of their husbands, Nantucket women have been compelled to transact business. They have kept their own accounts and indeed acted the part of men. Women's suffrage activists use Nantucket as a role model because it was a prime example of a blended, equal society. In the late 18th century, Center Street became known as Petticoat Row because almost all of the shops and businesses were owned by women. Wives, sisters, and daughters left behind formed a strong bond while working together to raise their children, keep a home, and run a business. On the mainland of the United States in the 18th century, women's roles were quite different. Women were expected to restrict their interests to within the home and family, and were not encouraged to receive an education or pursue a career. Nantucket, on the other hand, was dominated by strong, independent women who carried the local economy through their involvement in typical male roles. In 1774, Nantucket women's independence was strengthened through the mariner's power of attorney. Nantucket women were the first to receive this, and it became a precursor to the power of attorney that is present today. The document gave wives, sisters, daughters, and female friends of whalemen legal rights such as the right to sell property and handle financial accounts for the duration of the men's voyages. The women of Nantucket were well beyond their time in the sense that their independence and responsibilities surpassed all expectations of women in the 1800s. Whaling exploration encouraged racial diversity among captains and crews, Black, white, and Native Americans alike. The motto of a whaler was to get the job done and stay alive. Whales didn't discriminate against skin color, so neither did Nantucketers. Absalom Boston was the son and grandson of slaves, however made a name for himself upon his arrival on Nantucket. In 1822, he became the first African American to captain his own whaling ship and crew. Boston hired an all-black crew and sailed for 6 months on his ship, the Industry, returning with 70 barrels of whale oil and his entire crew intact. A portrait of Boston hangs in the Nantucket Whaling Museum. He is remembered in history as one of the most influential whaling captains and Nantucket residents. Boston owned a great deal of land, along with several houses and businesses as well. For the late 1800s, this kind of social and financial equality among races was unheard of. According to the U.S. Census in 1850, there were 3,204,051 slaves in both the northern and southern states, which is about 51 slaves per 100 whites. The majority of blacks were enslaved during 1850 and had virtually no rights as citizens of the United States. However, Absalom Boston defied the odds and was more successful than many whites at the time. Native Americans, who shared the island with the settlers, saw how successful the whaling industry had become and wanted in on the success. Natives worked on whaling ships as a vital part of the crew. The crew was paid based on their position on the ship and not their skin color. Natives, blacks, and whites were all paid equally based on position, proving that skin color, which was a major divisor on the mainland, was not an issue on a Nantucket whaling ship. The varied races maintained a working relationship and treated each other with professional respect. Pacific Islanders were also among the crews. They were from diverse places such as Tahiti, Polynesia, and Hawaii. When the Nantucket whaling ships stopped in these islands to collect water, food, and supplies, they often spoke with the islanders and recruited them onto their ships. The islanders would join the ship for a couple of months while they were in the Pacific, and then upon the ship's return to Nantucket, they would drop the islanders back to their native land. The islanders would receive whale oil as pay, which they then used as illuminators. In the end, it was all about making money. Nantucket was far ahead of its time as far as racial equality. Nantucket's economy was dominated by whale oil production, and foreign trade was a big part of the economic growth as well. Europe was Nantucket's first foreign trading partner and one of the largest importers of Nantucket whale oil. Beginning in 1764, when Nantucket and the rest of the United States were still under the control of Great Britain, King George III gave permission to Nantucket whaling men to continue whaling. Account books from candle and oil factories recorded the trade of their product with Europe and the amount of money it generated into the business. The Folger and Mitchell account book from 1821 shows the amount of oil shipped and how many barrels were sent overseas in total, along with the Gilbert Coffin account book, which displays the whaling products that were sold, such as candles, winter oil, and sperm oil. Winter whale oil was more expensive than spring and summer because the oil was harder to obtain. Spermaceti whale oil was the most expensive and best quality. The oil came from the head matter of a sperm whale and was most commonly found in the wealthier homes in Europe. In the 1800s, trade spread to Asia when a Nantucket whaling captain named Uriah Swain sailed his ship Mars to China and initiated the relationship. From that point on, Nantucket would trade whale oil for Chinese tea and other goods and souvenirs. This faux dog candlestick was a gift from James Carey to his wife Betsy. The candlestick holder is marked with their initials JBC and was made by the Chinese. The sailor's valentine was another common craft that was made by the Chinese and Hawaiians. Nantucket whalemen encountered many different cultures throughout their travels and were among the first to reach particular areas of the world and interact with inhabitants. Through these interactions, whalemen were able to expand their area of trade and develop strong relationships with various cultures. Nantucket whalemen spread their influence globally through exploration. Cape Verde was a common place to recruit and collect provisions for Nantucket whalemen. Later in the 19th century, Cape Verde sent workers to Nantucket to work on cranberry bogs and teach the islanders how to grow cranberries. Today, cranberries are one of the signature symbols of Nantucket, all due to the cultural exchange that whalemen encountered on their journeys. Another common place to stop for provisions and crew was the Azores. This created a connection between Nantucket and the Azores that influenced a thriving Azorean community on Nantucket. Countries such as New Zealand, France, China, South America, and Nova Scotia were all a part of Nantucket's web of social connections. Whalers developed friendly relationships with these countries, which enabled them to use these countries as ports for supplies and crew. Additionally, a craft that connected whalemen to home in other countries was scrimshaw. When a whale was caught, the teeth from its jaw would be handed out to the crew on board. Since most of the crew was illiterate, the captain would give them the teeth to draw on. The teeth that were engraved upon would then be given as gifts to whalemen's wives or exchanged for goods in various countries. The whaling industry, along with foreign trade and exchange, drove Nantucket's economy for most of the 18th century and encouraged strong relationships between Nantucket and the rest of the world. The Nantucket whaling industry was nearly a 200-year business that introduced not only oil to the global market, but fostered a culture of gender and racial equality that was unprecedented around the world at the time, and wouldn't be socially acceptable globally until the later half of the 20th century. Women were given leadership roles, trusted with handling financial accounts, and became the backbone of Nantucket society. Still today, most of the shops in downtown Nantucket are owned by women. Crews and captains aboard whaling ships were diverse. Blacks, whites, Native Americans, and Pacific Islanders worked together to get their job done. On a whale ship, color was pushed aside. Finally, the whaling industry propelled the economy and drove whalemen to encounter and exchange goods with various cultures and countries. The Nantucket whaling industry ignited a social and economic spark through gender and racial equality that was way ahead of its time and brought unimaginable wealth to the island during the 1800s.